My name is Thomas Grady, and I teach English at Roosevelt High School in Portland, Maine. 41 years old, married 15 years, father to one son. I drive a Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door, and I grade papers until my eyes burn. I'm the guy who explains Shakespeare to teenagers who'd rather watch TikTok. Nothing remarkable about me, except for one thing. I'm about to destroy my wife's life. But let me back up. 3 months ago, Elise suggested we restructure our finances. She called it optimizing our joint resources. My wife works as HR manager at Portland General Hospital, making twice my teacher's salary, and she has this way of making everything sound like a corporate memo. "Tom, we need to talk about the accounts," she said, over morning coffee. Her auburn hair was pulled back in that severe bun she wore to intimidate hospital staff. "I've been thinking we should consolidate everything into the joint account, streamline our finances." I looked up from grading essays about Romeo and Juliet. "Streamline how?" "Your paycheck goes directly into our joint account. I'll handle all the bills, investments, everything. It's more efficient." "What about your salary?" She stirred her coffee with mechanical precision. "I need to keep that separate for work expenses. Travel, conferences, professional development. You understand." I understood plenty, but I nodded like the trusting husband I was supposed to be. That was the beginning of what I now call marital communism. My money became our money. Her money remained her money. I was contributing to the collective while she maintained her private Swiss bank account, metaphorically speaking. The joint account arrangement worked exactly as she planned. Every 2 weeks, my modest teacher's paycheck disappeared into our shared checking account. Elise paid the mortgage, utilities, groceries. She handled everything with the efficiency of someone managing a small corporation. Meanwhile, her hospital salary vanished into her personal account like morning fog. I started calling her the financial commissar in my head. She ran our household budget like Stalin ran the Soviet Union, with iron control and zero transparency. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The first real sign came 6 weeks ago. Elise started working late, not occasionally, every Tuesday and Thursday, sometimes Fridays too. Hospital emergencies, she explained, budget meetings, staff evaluations, the usual bureaucratic emergencies that plague healthcare administration. "Another late night?" I'd ask when she came home at 9:30. "Budget crisis," she'd say, kicking off her heels. "Dr. Landon wants the quarterly reports restructured. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was. Teachers don't have budget crises that require intimate dinner meetings at expensive restaurants. But what did I know about hospital politics? Then came the phone calls. Elise would step outside to take them, claiming patient privacy issues. She'd pace our back deck, gesturing animatedly at whoever was on the other end. When I asked about it, she'd wave me off. "HIPAA compliance, Tom. You wouldn't understand." Right. Patient privacy laws required her to giggle like a teenager during serious medical discussions. My sister Molly works as a nurse at Portland General. She's 2 years younger than me, twice as observant, and she has the hospital gossip network mapped like a military intelligence operation. Over dinner last month, she mentioned something interesting. "Your wife's been spending a lot of time with Dr. Dorsey," she said, cutting into her salmon. "Who's Dr. Dorsey?" "Emergency room attending. Divorced last year. Drives a Tesla. Thinks he's God's gift to medicine. And women." I filed that information away. The breakthrough came 3 weeks ago at Brewster's coffee shop on Oak Street. I was grading papers in my usual corner booth when I overheard a familiar voice. Tasha Morrison, Elise's best friend and real estate agent, was holding court at the next table with 2 other women. "Elise is glowing lately," Tasha was saying. "Haven't seen her this happy in years. She's got herself some new stress relief, if you know what I mean." The women laughed knowingly. "About time," one of them said. "Tom's nice enough, but he's so ordinary. A high school teacher? Please. Elise deserves better." "She's found better," Tasha replied. "Doctor better, emergency room better, Tesla driving better." I kept grading essays, but my pen had stopped moving. They continued their conversation for 20 minutes, dissecting my marriage like amateur surgeons. Apparently, everyone except me knew about Elise's stress relief. I drove home that afternoon with a strange clarity. Not anger, not yet. Just the cold realization that I'd been cast as the oblivious husband in someone else's romantic comedy. That evening, I started paying attention. Elise's purse sat on the kitchen counter while she showered. I'm not proud of what I did next, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Inside, beneath her wallet and car keys, I found a conference badge from the Maine Medical Association's annual meeting. Nothing unusual there, except for the hotel keycard clipped to the back. Room 412 at the Portland Harbor Hotel. The conference had been last weekend. Elise told me she was staying with Tasha to avoid the downtown traffic. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it and went to my study. I sat there for an hour, staring at my computer screen, processing the implications. Then I did something I should have done weeks ago. I logged into our joint bank account. The balance made my stomach drop. 3 weeks ago, we had $47,000 in combined savings and checking. Tonight, we had $12,000. While I'd been grading papers and planning lessons, someone had been making substantial withdrawals. I clicked through the transaction history. 5 withdrawals over 2 weeks, each for exactly $7,000. All authorized by Elise's debit card. All transferred to an account I didn't recognize. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. My wife hadn't just been cheating on me. She'd been systematically draining our joint account, moving our money, my money, somewhere beyond my reach. The financial commissar had been planning her escape. I closed the laptop and walked to the kitchen. Elise was making tea, humming something under her breath. She looked genuinely happy for the first time in months. "Good day at work?" I asked. "The best," she said, smiling. "Everything's finally coming together." I smiled back. "That's wonderful, honey. I'm glad things are working out." She had no idea that her husband, the boring, ordinary high school teacher, had just discovered her exit strategy, and she definitely had no idea what I was planning to do about it. I woke up the next morning with the clarity that comes from having your entire worldview restructured overnight. Elise was already gone. Another early meeting, according to the note on the refrigerator. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, planning my next moves like a chess game. Rule 1. Never let them know you know. I had exactly one advantage in this situation. Elise and her doctor boyfriend thought I was clueless. The bumbling husband, too, wrapped up in lesson plans and parent conferences to notice his wife's affair. I intended to maintain that illusion until the perfect moment. At school that day, I taught my classes with unusual energy. My students in 4th period American literature actually seemed engaged when I explained the concept of dramatic irony in the cask of Amontillado. How fitting. Dramatic irony, I told them, occurs when the audience knows something the characters don't. It creates tension because we can see the trap being set, even when the victim can't. Jennifer Walsh, one of my brighter students, raised her hand. "So the reader knows Montresor is planning revenge, but Fortunato has no clue?" "Exactly. Fortunato thinks he's being honored, invited to taste rare wine. He doesn't realize he's walking into his own tomb." The bell rang, and my students filed out. I stayed behind, considering the parallels. Elise thought she was executing the perfect plan, the cheating wife who'd secured her financial future before making her dramatic exit. She had no idea her husband was watching every move. After school, I drove to Portland General Hospital, not to confront anyone. That would come later. I needed intelligence first. The hospital cafeteria buzzed with the usual afternoon crowd, doctors grabbing coffee between surgeries, nurses on break, administrative staff gossiping over salads. I found Molly at a corner table, still in her scrubs. "Tom?" She looked surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Thought I'd surprise Elise, take her to dinner." I sat down across from her. "Is she around?" Molly's expression shifted slightly. "She's in a meeting. Budget stuff with Dr. Landon." "Again?" "She's been having a lot of budget meetings lately." My sister studied my face. She's always been able to read me better than anyone else. "Tom, we need to talk." "About what?" "About your wife and Dr. Ryan Dorsey." I leaned back in my chair. "What about them?" "They've been spending a lot of time together, more than professional colleagues should." She paused. "People are talking." "What kind of talking?" "The kind where everyone knows except the husband." Molly reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry, Tom. I should have said something sooner." I managed to look appropriately shocked. "Are you sure? Maybe it's just work-related?" "Tuesday and Thursday dinner meetings at Romano's aren't work-related. Neither are weekend conferences where they share hotel rooms." "How do you know about the hotel rooms?" "Karina in HR processes the expense reports. She's been talking." Perfect. Hospital gossip was already spreading. That would make my job easier. "I can't believe this," I said, playing the devastated husband. 15 years of marriage, and she's throwing it away for some doctor? "I'm sorry, Tom, but you needed to know." I drove home that evening with my mind racing. The affair was common knowledge among hospital staff. Elise had been careless, arrogant in her assumption that her boring teacher husband would never find out. She'd underestimated the power of workplace gossip. That night, I waited until Elise was asleep, then crept down to my study. I opened my laptop and navigated to our joint bank account. Time for phase 1 of my counterattack. I transferred $500 from our joint account to my personal checking account, money for school supplies, according to the memo line. A small, innocent transaction that wouldn't raise any red flags. Then I changed my direct deposit information, redirecting my next paycheck to my personal account instead of our joint account. If Elise was planning to drain our shared resources, she'd find the well running dry faster than expected. Next, I opened a new browser window and began researching Dr. Ryan Dorsey. Social media made it embarrassingly easy. The man had an ego the size of his Tesla and the online presence to match. His Instagram featured photos from expensive restaurants, weekend trips to Boston, and plenty of shots with attractive women. None of them were my wife, but the pattern was clear. Dr. Dorsey liked to live well and he liked to show off. His LinkedIn profile revealed even more interesting details. Recently divorced, as Molly had mentioned. 2 children living with his ex-wife in Massachusetts. A hefty child support obligation that probably explained his interest in my wife's HR manager salary. I spent 2 hours building a comprehensive profile of my wife's boyfriend. His habits, his hangouts, his weaknesses. Knowledge is power, and I intended to be very powerful. The next morning, Elise was rushing around the kitchen, grabbing coffee and checking her phone. "Another early meeting?" I asked innocently. "Dr. Landon wants to review the staffing budget before the board meeting." She kissed my cheek absently. "Don't wait up tonight. This could run late." "Of course. Important work." She paused at the door. "Tom, I've been thinking. Maybe we should refinance the house. Interest rates are good right now." "Refinance? Why?" "Just to free up some equity for Ben's college fund." Our son Ben was 13. College was still 5 years away. But refinancing would give Elise access to our home's equity, another source of funds for her exit strategy. "Let me think about it," I said. "Don't think too long. Good rates don't last forever." After she left, I sat at my kitchen table, sipping coffee and considering her latest move. The joint account drain, the hotel room receipts, and now a push to refinance our house. Elise was accelerating her timeline. That afternoon, I had a free period and decided to do some field research. Romano's restaurant was a 15-minute drive from school. I parked across the street and waited. At 12:30, a silver Tesla pulled into the parking lot. Dr. Ryan Dorsey stepped out, tall, dark-haired, wearing an expensive suit that screamed, "I make more money than your husband." He walked into the restaurant with the confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences. 5 minutes later, my wife's Honda Accord pulled up. Elise emerged wearing a dress I'd never seen before. Black, fitted, definitely not her usual hospital attire. She checked her reflection in the car window before walking inside. I sat there for an hour, watching my wife have lunch with her boyfriend. They sat at a corner table, leaning close, laughing at private jokes. At one point, Dorsey reached across the table and touched her hand. Elise smiled in a way I hadn't seen in years. They looked happy, genuinely, radiantly happy. That's when the anger finally hit me. Not just about the affair, though that was bad enough, but about the lies, the financial manipulation, the complete disrespect for our 15-year marriage. Elise wasn't just cheating on me. She was systematically dismantling our life together while pretending to be the loving wife. I drove back to school and taught my afternoon classes with grim determination. My students probably thought I was having a bad day. They had no idea I was planning a war. That evening, I made my first real move. At 2 a.m., while Elise slept peacefully beside me, I crept downstairs to my computer. I logged into our joint bank account and initiated a transfer. Not the remaining $12,000, that would be too obvious. Just $8,000 moved to a new savings account I'd opened that afternoon. In the memo line, I wrote, "Emergency Fund, Household Repairs." Then I changed the account settings, requiring dual authorization for any withdrawals over $1,000. Elise would need my signature to access the remaining funds. Let's see how she explained that to Dr. Dorsey. I closed the laptop and went back to bed, sliding carefully under the covers. Elise stirred slightly but didn't wake. She looked peaceful, probably dreaming about her new life with her doctor boyfriend. She had no idea the boring high school teacher was about to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. The Portland General Hospital annual charity gala was always the social event of the season for the medical community. $500 per plate, black tie required, and enough gossip to fuel the hospital rumor mill for months. This year's theme was Healing Hearts, Building Hope. Ironic, considering what I was planning to do to my wife's heart. Elise had been excited about the gala for weeks. She'd bought a new dress, emerald green, probably expensive, charged to her personal credit card. She'd made appointments for hair and nails. This was her chance to shine in front of her hospital colleagues, to play the role of successful HR manager with her handsome doctor boyfriend. She just didn't know her husband would be there too. "I wish you could come," she'd said the week before, applying lipstick in our bedroom mirror. "But you know how these hospital events are. Boring medical talk, inside jokes you wouldn't understand." "Of course," I'd replied. "You have fun with your colleagues." What she didn't know was that I'd purchased my own ticket 3 days earlier. The hospital foundation was happy to take money from a local teacher supporting their cause. I'd even arranged for a babysitter for Ben, telling him I was attending a school district function. The gala was held at the Portland Harbor Hotel, the same hotel where my wife had spent that weekend conference with Dr. Dorsey. I arrived early, checked my appearance in the men's room mirror, and positioned myself at the bar with a clear view of the entrance. At 7:15, they arrived together. Dr. Ryan Dorsey looked exactly like his social media photos, tall, confident, wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than my monthly salary. He moved through the crowd like he owned the place, shaking hands with colleagues, accepting compliments with practiced charm. And beside him, radiant in her emerald dress, was my wife. They weren't trying to hide their relationship. Dorsey's hand rested on the small of Elise's back as they moved through the crowd. She laughed at his jokes, touched his arm when she spoke to him, gazed at him with obvious adoration. To anyone watching, they looked like the perfect couple. I nursed my whiskey and waited. The evening proceeded exactly as I'd expected. Cocktails, dinner, speeches about the hospital's charitable mission. I stayed in the background, just another face in the crowd, watching my wife and her boyfriend work the room like a political power couple. During the silent auction, I made my move. I approached their table casually, as if I'd just noticed them across the room. "Elise? What a surprise!" My wife's face went through a fascinating series of expressions: shock, panic, and finally a forced smile. "Tom, what are you doing here?" "Supporting the hospital's mission," I said cheerfully. "I know how important your work is to you. Thought I'd contribute to the cause." Dr. Dorsey extended his hand with professional courtesy. "You must be Tom. I'm Ryan Dorsey, emergency medicine. Your wife's told me so much about you." I shook his hand firmly. "All good things, I hope. And you're the famous Dr. Dorsey. Elise mentions you constantly. Budget meetings, staffing consultations, all those late-night emergency sessions." Something flickered in Dorsey's eyes. Beside him, Elise had gone pale. "Well," she said quickly, "Tom was just saying hello. I'm sure you have other people to see." "Actually," I interrupted, "I was hoping to chat with Dr. Dorsey about the hospital's financial management. As Elise's husband, I'm fascinated by her work. All those complex budgetary decisions, the intimate collaboration required between departments." I emphasized the word intimate just slightly. Dorsey caught it. "Perhaps we could talk later," he said smoothly. "I see Dr. Landon waving me over." "Of course. Don't let me interrupt your important hospital business." They moved away quickly, Elise's hand tight on Dorsey's arm. I returned to the bar and ordered another whiskey, satisfied with round one. But I was just getting started. During the main presentation, I excused myself and found Adam Chen in the hotel's business center. Adam had been one of my students 5 years ago. Quiet kid, brilliant with computers, now working in the hospital's IT department. I'd helped him through a difficult time when his parents were divorcing, and he'd never forgotten the kindness. "Mr. Grady, what are you doing here?" "Supporting the hospital," I said. "Listen, Adam, I need a small favor. Nothing illegal, just a technical consultation." "What kind of consultation?" I explained what I needed. Adam looked uncomfortable at first, but I reminded him of our history, of how I'd stayed after school to help him when he was failing English, of the recommendation letter I'd written for his college applications. "It's really important, Adam, and it's not technically against any rules." 20 minutes later, we'd made the necessary arrangements. The evening's presentation was winding down when the hotel's audiovisual system experienced a minor technical glitch. The screen displaying information about the hospital's achievements flickered, then displayed a series of security camera images that definitely weren't part of the official presentation. The images showed 2 people entering the hospital through a side entrance on a Saturday evening 3 weeks ago. The timestamp clearly showed 8:47 p.m., well after normal business hours. The man was tall, dark-haired, wearing casual clothes. The woman was shorter, auburn hair, carrying what looked like a bottle of wine. The crowd murmured in confusion. Some people began to recognize the figures on screen. "Technical difficulties," announced the master of ceremonies. "We'll have this sorted out in just a moment." But the images kept cycling. The same 2 people in the hospital parking garage, walking down a corridor, entering what appeared to be an office. I watched my wife's face from across the room. She'd gone completely white. Beside her, Dr. Dorsey was frantically gesturing to someone near the audiovisual booth. Finally, the images disappeared, replaced by the hospital's official logo. "Sorry about that technical glitch," the MC announced. "Now, let's continue with our program." But the damage was done. The whispers had already started. People were looking at Elise and Dorsey, connecting the dots, realizing what they'd just witnessed. I finished my whiskey and walked over to their table. "Fascinating presentation," I said to Elise. "Really illuminating. I had no idea hospital security systems were so comprehensive." "Tom, I can explain." "Explain what? You were working late, right? Budget meetings, emergency consultations. Very dedicated of you to come in on weekends." Dr. Dorsey stood up abruptly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding at all," I said pleasantly. "I completely understand the situation. My wife is very committed to her work. She'll do anything for the hospital. Work nights, weekends, whatever it takes." The people at nearby tables were listening now. The whispers were spreading through the room like ripples in a pond. "Tom, please," Elise whispered. "Not here." "Why not here? This is your professional community. These are your colleagues. Shouldn't they know how dedicated you are? How much personal time you invest in hospital business?" I looked directly at Dr. Dorsey. "And you, Doctor. Such commitment to your budgetary responsibilities, coming in on weekends, staying late with HR staff. That's the kind of hands-on management this hospital needs." Dorsey's jaw was clenched tight. "I think you should leave." "Leave? But I'm just getting started. I haven't even told everyone about the joint account yet." Elise grabbed my arm. "Tom, stop. Please." I looked down at her hand on my sleeve, then back at her face. For the first time in months, I had her complete attention. "You know what, honey? You're right. This isn't the time or place for financial discussions. That's more of a private conversation between married couples." I gently removed her hand from my arm. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, both of you. I'm sure you have a lot to discuss." I walked away, leaving them standing there as the whispers grew louder around them. Behind me, I could hear Elise's voice, high and strained, trying to explain something to the people at their table. But explanations wouldn't help now. The damage was done. By tomorrow morning, everyone at Portland General Hospital would know about the security camera footage. They'd know about the weekend visits, the after-hours meetings, the intimate collaboration between HR and emergency medicine. I drove home with a sense of deep satisfaction. Phase 2 was complete. But I was far from finished with my wife and her doctor boyfriend. The real fun was just beginning. The fallout from the charity gala was even better than I'd hoped. By Monday morning, the hospital gossip network was in overdrive. Molly called me during my lunch break, barely able to contain her excitement. "Tom, you should see this place. Everyone's talking about Saturday night. Elise hasn't come out of her office all morning, and Dr. Dorsey looks like he hasn't slept in days." "Really? That's unfortunate." "Unfortunate? Tom, it's beautiful. Dr. Landon called Dorsey into his office first thing this morning. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Perfect. I'd been hoping the hospital administration would take notice. And get this," Molly continued. "Karina from HR told me that Elise tried to access the security footage from that Saturday night, wanted to have it deleted. But IT told her it was already flagged as evidence for a potential workplace conduct investigation. Evidence I'd made sure would be flagged thanks to Adam's technical assistance." "Sounds complicated," I said innocently. "Complicated? Tom, they're both in serious trouble. The hospital has strict policies about personal relationships between staff members, especially when one person has administrative authority over the other. Elise could lose her job." That evening, Elise came home looking like she'd been through a war. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, her makeup smudged, her professional composure completely shattered. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "Of course. How was your day?" "Don't play games with me, Tom. What you did Saturday night was cruel and humiliating." I looked up from the papers I was grading. "What I did? I attended a charity function, made a donation to support your workplace. I thought you'd be pleased." "You know exactly what you did. Those security camera images didn't appear by accident." "Security camera images? I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm just a high school English teacher, remember? I don't know anything about hospital security systems. She stared at me for a long moment, probably trying to figure out how her boring, predictable husband had orchestrated Saturday night's humiliation. The hospital is conducting an investigation, she said finally. Investigation into what? Into my relationship with Ryan. Your relationship? I thought Dr. Dorsey was just a colleague. Budget meetings, staffing consultations, professional collaboration. Tom, please. I know you're angry and you have every right to be, but this isn't just about us anymore. My job is at stake. Ryan's career could be ruined. I set down my red pen and looked at her directly. Your job is at stake because you've been having an affair with a subordinate doctor. Ryan's career could be ruined because he's been sleeping with the HR manager who oversees his department. Those are consequences of your choices, not my actions. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You made decisions. Now you're facing the results. She sat down across from me, and for a moment, she looked like the woman I'd married 15 years ago. Vulnerable, uncertain, human. What do you want, Tom? What will it take to make this stop? Make what stop? I haven't done anything except attend a charity gala. You're destroying my life. No, Elise. You destroyed your life, and our marriage, and our family. I'm just making sure everyone else knows what you did. The next few days brought a cascade of consequences that exceeded even my expectations. Dr. Landon suspended Ryan Dorsey pending the outcome of the workplace conduct investigation. The suspension was unpaid, which meant Dorsey's expensive lifestyle suddenly became unsustainable. His Tesla payments, his downtown apartment rent, his child support obligations, all of it depended on his hospital salary. Elise was placed on administrative leave while the investigation continued. She wasn't suspended, but she wasn't allowed to participate in any personnel decisions involving medical staff. Essentially, she was sidelined from her own job. The social consequences were even more devastating. Tasha Morrison, Elise's supposed best friend, suddenly became unavailable for lunch dates and shopping trips. Other members of their social circle began treating Elise like she had a contagious disease. Nobody wanted to be associated with the hospital scandal. But I wasn't finished yet. On Thursday evening, I drove to Dorsey's apartment building, a trendy converted warehouse in the Arts District. His Tesla was parked in its assigned space, gleaming under the parking garage lights. I'd brought a small container of car wax and a cloth. Nothing destructive, nothing that would cause permanent damage, just a little artistic expression on his rear windshield. In neat block letters I wrote, "Home Wrecker." Then I called the local news tip line from a burner phone I'd purchased that afternoon. "I'd like to report a story about workplace misconduct at Portland General Hospital," I said. "There's a doctor who's been having an affair with the HR manager. It's causing quite a scandal." Friday morning brought the local news crew to the hospital parking lot, just as Dorsey was arriving for what he thought was a meeting with Dr. Landon. The reporters intercepted him as he walked from his car, his Tesla with "Home Wrecker" still visible on the rear window. "Dr. Dorsey, can you comment on the allegations of workplace misconduct? Are you concerned about the impact on patient care? What's your response to claims that you've been having an inappropriate relationship with hospital administration?" Dorsey tried to push past them without comment, but the damage was done. The story would air on the evening news, complete with footage of his vandalized car and his obvious guilt. That evening, Elise confronted me again. "This has gone too far, Tom. The news crews, the public humiliation. This isn't about our marriage anymore. You're trying to destroy us completely." "Us? There is no us, Elise. There's you, there's your boyfriend, and there's the mess you've both created. Ryan had nothing to do with the financial issues." "Financial issues? Is that what we're calling grand larceny now?" She looked confused. "What are you talking about?" I walked to my study and returned with a folder full of bank statements and printed transaction records. $35,000, I said, spreading the papers across our kitchen table. "That's how much you've stolen from our joint account over the past 2 months. stolen, and transferred to your personal account to fund your new life with Dr. Dorsey. I didn't steal anything. That money was ours. Was it? Because I seem to remember you explaining that your salary needed to stay separate for professional expenses. My salary went into our joint account for family expenses, so when you drained that account, you were stealing my money. Tom, you're being ridiculous. Am I? Because I've documented every transaction, every withdrawal, every transfer, and I've shared that documentation with a very interesting audience. What audience? I smiled. The IRS, for starters. Turns out they're very interested in cases where one spouse systematically moves marital assets to hidden accounts. They call it financial fraud. That wasn't entirely true. I hadn't contacted the IRS yet, but Elise didn't know that. You also might be interested to know that I've changed the direct deposit for my paychecks. They're no longer going into our joint account, and I've frozen all joint credit cards and lines of credit. If you want to fund your new lifestyle, you'll have to do it with your own money. Elise stared at the bank statements, probably calculating how much she'd need to return to avoid serious legal consequences. There's more, I continued. I've been in touch with a divorce attorney. Did you know that Maine is a fault-based divorce state? That means your adultery isn't just morally wrong, it's legally relevant. It affects property division, alimony, even custody arrangements. You can't take Ben away from me. I don't want to take Ben away from you, but I want him to understand what kind of person his mother really is, what kind of choices she's made. As if summoned by his name, our 13-year-old son appeared in the kitchen doorway. He'd been listening from the stairs. I already know, Dad, he said quietly. I've known for weeks. Elise turned toward him, her face crumpling. Ben, sweetheart. I heard you on the phone with him, Ben continued. Late at night when you thought everyone was asleep. I heard you talking about leaving Dad, about starting over somewhere new. Ben, I can explain. You don't need to explain anything, Mom. I understand perfectly. He walked over and stood beside my chair. I want to live with Dad. The words hit Elise like a physical blow. She reached toward Ben, but he stepped back. You chose your new boyfriend over our family, he said. So I'm choosing Dad over you. That night, after Ben had gone to bed and Elise had locked herself in our bedroom, I sat in my study reviewing my handiwork. Dr. Ryan Dorsey was suspended from his job, facing a workplace misconduct investigation and dealing with very public humiliation. His expensive lifestyle was unsustainable without his hospital salary. Elise was on administrative leave, socially ostracized, and facing the possibility of divorce proceedings that would leave her with minimal assets and limited custody. Their affair, which had seemed so romantic and exciting just weeks ago, was now a liability that threatened to destroy both their careers. But I still wasn't satisfied. I wanted them to understand the full cost of their betrayal. I wanted them to experience the same helplessness I'd felt when I discovered their deception. I wanted them to know what it felt like to have their entire world collapse around them. And I had one final move planned that would accomplish exactly that. The final phase of my plan began on a Tuesday morning when Elise served me with divorce papers. She'd hired Marcus Klein, one of Portland's most aggressive divorce attorneys, the kind of lawyer who specialized in destroying husbands and maximizing settlements for wronged wives. Klein had a reputation for ruthless tactics and courtroom theatrics that intimidated judges and opposing counsel alike. The papers were delivered while I was teaching my first period class. A process server interrupted my lesson on Macbeth to hand me the legal documents, creating exactly the kind of public spectacle Elise had intended. But as I read through Klein's filing, I realized my wife had made a critical miscalculation. She wasn't just asking for a divorce. She was asking for everything. According to the petition, I was an abusive husband who had engaged in financial manipulation, emotional harassment, and threatening behavior. The filing claimed I had systematically isolated Elise from her friends and family, controlled her access to marital assets, and created a hostile environment that forced her to seek comfort elsewhere. Klein was portraying Elise as the victim and me as the villain. The strategy was brilliant in its audacity. By claiming abuse, Elise could potentially secure a restraining order that would force me out of our house. She could gain temporary custody of Ben, temporary control of our assets, and temporary support payments, all while the divorce proceedings dragged on for months or years. If the strategy worked, I'd be left with nothing while she and Dorsey rebuilt their lives with my money. There was just one problem with their plan. I'd been expecting it. That afternoon, I drove to my attorney's office with 3 boxes of documentation I'd been assembling for weeks. Not just bank records and transaction histories, but something much more valuable: evidence of their real plan. "Tom, this is remarkable," said Janet Pierce, the family law attorney I'd retained the previous month. "Where did you get all this?" "Patience and attention to detail," I replied, "plus some help from people who believe in justice." The evidence told a story that Klein and Elise hadn't anticipated. Thanks to Adam's technical assistance and Molly's access to hospital records, I'd documented not just the affair, but the systematic planning that preceded it. Email records showing Elise researching divorce attorneys 6 weeks before I discovered the affair. Financial records showing her moving money to hidden accounts while still playing the loving wife. Text messages between her and Dorsey discussing their strategy for handling the Tom situation. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source: Tasha Morrison. Elise's former best friend, feeling betrayed by her association with the hospital scandal, had provided me with recordings of conversations she'd had with Elise over the past 2 months. Conversations where Elise had explicitly discussed framing me for abuse to gain advantage in divorce proceedings. "I just need to document a pattern of controlling behavior," Elise's voice said clearly on the recording. "Marcus says judges always believe the wife if there's any suggestion of abuse. Tom's too nice to actually hurt anyone, but I can make it look like emotional abuse." "Are you sure about this?" Tasha's voice responded. "Tom's not a bad guy." "Tom's in the way," Elise replied coldly. "He's boring, he's poor, and he's keeping me from the life I deserve. If I have to destroy his reputation to get rid of him, that's what I'll do." Janet played the recording 3 times, taking notes. "This changes everything," she said finally. "They're not just committing adultery, they're committing fraud, conspiracy to file false abuse allegations, perjury, potentially even extortion. What's our next move?" We flipped the script. Instead of responding to their divorce petition, we file criminal complaints. Let the district attorney's office know what they're planning. Turn their own strategy against them. The next morning, I didn't go to school. Instead, I spent 4 hours at the Cumberland County District Attorney's office, providing evidence of the conspiracy to file false abuse allegations. The assistant DA who reviewed my case was a sharp woman in her 30s who specialized in domestic violence cases. She was particularly interested in the recordings of Elise discussing her plan to fabricate abuse claims. "This is exactly the kind of case that makes real abuse victims harder to believe," she said grimly. "We take false allegations very seriously. What happens now? Now we investigate. And if we find evidence of conspiracy to file false police reports, your wife and her attorney could face criminal charges." That afternoon, I returned to school and taught my classes as if nothing had happened. But I could feel the tension building like an approaching storm. The storm broke on Thursday morning. I was in my classroom grading papers when Principal Martinez knocked on my door. "Tom, there are police officers here to see you." I followed her to the main office, where 2 detectives were waiting. Behind them stood Elise, Marcus Klein, and a third man I didn't recognize. "Mr. Grady," said the older detective, "we need to ask you some questions about allegations of domestic abuse." "Of course," I said calmly. "I've been expecting this." Klein stepped forward. "My client has provided evidence of systematic emotional and financial abuse spanning several months. We're seeking an emergency restraining order." "Actually," interrupted the younger detective, "we're here about a different matter. Mr. Grady, We understand you filed a complaint alleging conspiracy to fabricate abuse allegations? Klein's confident expression faltered. What conspiracy? I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a folder. The conspiracy documented in these recordings, these emails, and these financial records. The conspiracy your client discussed with multiple witnesses over the past 2 months. What recordings? Elise demanded. I handed the detective a transcript of Tasha's recordings. The recordings where your client explicitly discusses framing me for abuse to gain advantage in divorce proceedings. The recordings where she admits I've never actually abused her, but she plans to make it look like emotional abuse anyway. Klein grabbed the transcript and read it quickly, his face growing pale. These recordings were obtained illegally. Actually, said the detective, they were provided voluntarily by a witness who was concerned about potential perjury. Maine is a one-party consent state for recordings, so they're perfectly admissible. This is ridiculous, Elise said, but her voice lacked conviction. Tom has been harassing me for weeks. The public humiliation, the financial manipulation. The public humiliation, I interrupted, consisted of attending a charity gala where security cameras captured you and Dr. Dorsey entering the hospital after hours for personal activities. The financial manipulation consisted of preventing you from stealing more money from our joint account. I turned to the detectives. Everything I did was legal and documented. Everything she planned to do was criminal conspiracy. The older detective looked at Klein. Counselor, we're going to need your client to come in for questioning. The DA's office is very interested in this case. This is outrageous, Klein blustered. My client is the victim here. Your client, said the detective firmly, is the subject of a criminal investigation for conspiracy to file false police reports. I suggest you advise her to cooperate fully. As the police led Elise away, she looked back at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not hatred, but genuine fear. For the first time since this began, she understood that her boring, predictable husband had outmaneuvered her completely. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with Ben, eating pizza and watching the local news. The lead story was about a Portland General Hospital doctor and HR manager facing criminal charges for conspiracy and fraud. Dad, Ben said quietly, are you okay with all this? I considered the question. 3 months ago, I'd been a trusting husband who believed his wife's lies about budget meetings and late-night emergencies. Tonight, I was a single father whose wife was facing potential jail time for conspiracy to commit fraud. I'm okay, I said finally. Your mother made choices, and now she's facing the consequences. That's how justice works. What happens next? Next, we rebuild. We start over. We create the life we actually want instead of the life someone else planned for us. Ben nodded solemnly. I'm glad you fought back, Dad. I'm glad you didn't just let them win. I looked at my son, 13 years old, wise beyond his years, already understanding that sometimes good people have to fight dirty to survive. Sometimes, I told him, the only way to beat someone who's cheating is to be smarter than they are. Your mother thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She didn't realize I'd been planning my moves long before she made hers. The next morning brought news that exceeded even my expectations. Dr. Ryan Dorsey had been arrested at his apartment on charges of conspiracy and fraud. Marcus Klein was under investigation by the State Bar Association for potential ethics violations. And Elise was in jail, unable to make bail, because all her hidden assets had been frozen pending the criminal investigation. I drove to school that morning with a sense of completion I hadn't felt in months. The trap had been set, sprung, and closed. My wife and her boyfriend had gone from planning my destruction to facing their own. In my first period class, I returned to teaching Macbeth, the story of ambition, betrayal, and the consequences of overreaching. The tragedy of Macbeth, I told my students, isn't that he was evil. It's that he thought he was smarter than everyone else. He thought he could commit the perfect crime and face no consequences. Jennifer Walsh raised her hand. But he did face consequences. Everyone who betrayed someone else in the play ended up destroyed. Exactly, I said, smiling. Shakespeare understood something important about human nature. People who think they're clever enough to betray others without consequences usually aren't as clever as they think they are. The bell rang, and my students filed out. I stayed behind, organizing my lesson plans and thinking about the future. Elise had wanted everything in her name. Now she could keep her nothing. Dr. Dorsey had wanted the perfect life with someone else's wife and someone else's money. Now he had neither. And I had exactly what I'd wanted from the beginning: justice, my son, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the underdog wins. The joint account was closed. The Mercy account had always been empty, and Thomas Grady, boring high school English teacher, had just taught the most important lesson of his career.